Culture, a podcast dedicated to preventing and reducing interpersonal violence through empowerment self-defense. ESD, or empowerment self-defense, can reduce completed acts of violence by up to 50% and is a holistic approach to personal safety using the 5 principles of think, yell, run, fight, and tell. My name is Annie Orenstein. I am your host of the Change the Culture podcast at My Power and producer of My Power Casts. My Power is a social tech startup dedicated to reducing and preventing interpersonal violence through technology, education, and community. Thank you for joining us. On today's show, we have Dr. Jelena Nolan-Roll. Dr. Nolan-Roll is an accomplished writer, researcher, empowerment activist, psychologist, parent, and coach. From humble beginnings in a notoriously violent area of Blocs in Serbian capital Belgrade, where she first started her empowerment charity in her youth, she now lives as a safe and fulfilling life between England and the Balkans. She firmly believes that everyone should live up to their true potential and is eager to coach others through their journey through either one-on-one coaching, workshops, or stories. Dr. Nolan-Roll has achieved a master's degree in psychology as well as a Ph.D. in education focused on narrative inquiry. She has found success in writing with her award-winning story, Nesreća, which means accident, and her novel, We Do Talk About Blocs, is coming out in the next few months in Serbia. She is also a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu novice, and she collects, collates, and writes about empowerment self-defense research. So, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I had the pleasure of meeting you not so long ago. We had you at My Power for International Women's Day. And it was very special to have you. And I'm so grateful that you're on Change the Culture podcast. We have a lot to get to, and thank you. So maybe you can tell us, Dr. Nolan-Roll, a little bit about what it was like for you to grow up in Belgrade and the culture there.
Well, Belgrade is a special place for me. It's like, but the Blocs, it's like there's Belgrade and there are Blocs, which is this inner city part of town, which they had a good idea when they built them, like put as many people on as small a space as you can, like those high rises. But then the wars came, so all the cultural content was kind of gone. So you just had lots of people at one place. You had the clash of values, you had wars raging around, and it was challenging. Like in school where I went, there was like 43 of us in a class at one point. Teachers were not that interested. Boys were more interested about getting into the gang than getting into school. And yeah, that's how I grew up. However, I read all of my life, so I would go and run away into my stories and science fiction mainly. And but that was what there was, because I didn't know anything different, just in my head and stories. So yes, that was Blocs in the 90s, basically. It was very closed. I remember that feeling trapped quite a lot. And because I only had Serbian passport, so if you wanted to go even to Hungary, which is the next country over, you would have to camp in front of the embassy for a night, and then you would get the visa for like 2 days. And then,
Wow.
So it was, yeah. It's like America, like, no, nobody can get there because, just you can't. So, yeah, so it was very, trappy.
Wow. Was that the same as a child, as a young adult? Did it change?
It was, so as a young adult, yes, as well. But as like teenager, more like as a child, you don't really care. So, but, as a teenager, and then I remember reading about, people traveling on their gap years. And I was like, how can you do that? Like, that makes no sense, And then as a young adult, starting to meet the travelers, the adventure travelers who would go through Serbia and through the Blocs, who are like, I worked as a waitress and then I can afford it. So I was like, what? That makes no sense. Like, it just, does not compute. So, yeah.
Wow. And when you were young, you started an empowerment charity. What was that?
I have, yes. So I spent a lot of time in a certain cafe in the Blocs ran by my godfather, and I talked to people. I was studying psychology, and then because I was local, people would come and share stories with me. And then I've heard quite a lot about, especially women have a lot of experience with physical and sexual violence in the Blocs. And And I was like, I want to do something about it. So I'm a psychology student at that time. And I was like, I know, I'm just going to start this little charity. And it was Thursday. So on Thursdays, we're going to clean the upper part of the cafe and we will talk about it. So I was 22 or 3 at the time. I knew nothing because I was like, I don't know how, I just had an idea. So I did that, and that turned into like girls' nights every Thursday. And it was a great place, great community. And I really didn't expect some people to come in and just sit there. We would play games, we would do stuff. So it wasn't like therapy session, just like girls' nights. And it lasted for a while, and then I had to travel somewhere or something. But yes, so I I would encourage anybody who wants to do something like that to do it as soon as possible so they can learn from mistakes, because I would do it so much differently now. I would ask more support from like other organizations. I felt on my own and I felt overwhelmed, and then people would come and what do I do now? And I was like, oh, I have no idea. And I had no mentors, and so I think it was bound to fail, but it was also a great learning experience. So later when I started doing other things, I knew the importance of connecting with others, asking for help, asking for support, ideas and one person, unless you're doing individual stuff, is never enough. So community, like the importance of community.
Wow, so you afford women and also an outlet to see one another and to just let down their guard and to be in the same place and just to exist.
Yeah, and people still tell me about it. I thought it was nothing, but like I met one of them. She worked as a waitress in a nearby cafe, and that was like a few years ago. And she was like, "Oh, remember those Thursdays? I've really appreciated them." I was like, "Wow," because I was just thinking about everything which was going wrong, but they saw it as this wonderful opportunity to do it. And I mean, I did have help from people like my godfather, who was the cafe owner, and who did say like no one's allowed up. So, but yeah, I was quite insecure, and like I had my issues. So, but yeah, it was.
So by closing off the space, it became a sacred space and a safe space for you and the women on the blocks. Wow,
yes,
amazing.
Yes, he is pretty amazing human. And I mean that's why I do. So in that space that happened, but I've also heard stories of other people coming there, because like there's a lot of prejudices about the blocks. So I went to the uni in the center of town, and when people would hear where I'm from, it was like, oh, blocks, ghetto, blah blah blah. That was one thing, and everybody was like, yeah, you go there, there are no theaters, there are no cinemas, there's no museums, there's nothing there in the blocks. So a lot of it was like looking down on people. And then I would go back home, I would go for a coffee, and people would come in. So it was mostly, so he's an ex-army person, so it would be like security guards, and a lot of the people worked in air traffic control for some reason, but people with normal jobs and with not very academic-y, but very deep people with very very intimate, important stories. And I was really privileged to hear those stories. And and that's kind of forms the basis of my book. Obviously not the real stories, and like not the real stories of real people, they're all kind of conglomerates imagined. But and I was just like, hey, like, it's just because they don't have degrees doesn't mean that they don't have life experience. And I remember, so there's this big walkway through the blocks. It's called like, so there are only a few streets, and then you have a block between them where like you have say 50,000 people live. 50,000, it's like, I don't know, 10,000, lots of people living. And this walkway is like, there's that place in New York, High Line, is that it? So think, you know what I mean? So think High Line, but on the ground. It's not that posh. It's just like strip of concrete. And we're going back, and I'm going back next to this guy who's like 2x2 security guard. And I'm like, I'm not afraid to go deep at all. So it's like, to go sadness, traumas, like we talk about it. But I am afraid to go back home alone through the blocks very often, because you would have not just people, but like rabid dogs walking, like, it's like, it was a scary place. And every now and then something would happen. And I was like, he's not afraid to go back home through the blocks at all. But only a few days ago, we talked about him having a panic attack and like not knowing what to do with it. So yes, again, I think we come back to the importance of a community and just helping each other to empower each other. So,
and which is a segue also as well into empowerment self-defense, and you know, finding ourselves in places where we ask ourselves the, you know, think, yell, run, fight, and tell, and where am I and how do I feel about where I am. And so how did you get involved with ESD?
well, one, so that was March 2017. And it was like prequel to my involvement, and I was bored because I only worked 2 days a week. I was 7 months pregnant, 6 months, 7 months pregnant. So, and I was like, I want to do something. So I started volunteering for this women's charity in Bristol, and they had the International Women's Day. I came there and I saw Imogen, who is to become a very good friend, and she was running self-defense workshops. I went there and she started talking about situational awareness. And I was like, whoa, that's it. Because I did Krav Maga before. So I learned some physical stuff. But this concept of learning to pay attention to your surrounding, which is also something ESD has, it was completely new for me, but it kind of clicked into the place. And then Imogen connected with Judith at some point, and then I got to meet the amazing woman Judith. That rhymes. Got to meet amazing woman Judith. And yes, we started.
Of my power.
Yeah, and we started
things.
doing stuff together. So like I've been helping with the research. I've been, you know, leading this measurements commissions, but yes, so because my great passion is research and researching about empowerment self-defense, and because I, you know, just because I believe it works doesn't mean it works, but then research consistently shows it works, and it works
legitimacy.
Sorry?
It gives it legitimacy.
Correct. Yes. And I think, but at the same time, academia seems a bit reluctant to accept it. Some parts of academia, for example, we applied to go to conferences and we get refused without any good, like, you know, we applied with 5 abstracts to one conference, they all got refused. I'm like, so I would, you know, I would love to work, and I do work on kind of breaking that barrier. So it's like, by all means, reject us if research is not good, you know, that makes sense. But you know, just because you don't like it, you know, I'm not okay with that. So, yeah.
And what conferences have taken ESD further, have opened the door for ESD?
I've been to a great conference was it 2 weeks ago in Preston in the UK? It's Connect Center, and we had some really good conversations there. They are Center for International Interpersonal Violence, I think. I can find out the exact name of it. And there were some really good conversations happening there. It's, I mean, there is a problem of landscape here because not many people, a lot of places deal with outcomes of violence, but not so many with prevention of it.
Right.
So, and, you know, so sometimes there's not enough spaces to present. So there's only sometimes 2 or 3. And, you know, and they want to work on after effects, which is also fair enough and legitimate, but you know, in my opinion, it makes more sense to work on preventing it, like, you know, brush your teeth so you don't have to build new ones when you're 40, you know.
Right.
So yeah, and it's not either or, like we should work on both things, obviously.
Right.
And
absolutely,
it's just that we should work more on prevention.
Absolutely. So and you mentioned Krav Maga. You also did kickboxing. You jumped into Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah. So okay, Krav Maga I did ages ago, and I loved it. Then I got pregnant, and then you can't train that when you're pregnant, blah blah blah. But
I did Krav Maga for 2 years myself.
I still think it's very good. And so I've started kickboxing in September 2021 when I was 40. I'm 41 now. My daughter started it, and then I spoke to the instructor and I said, too bad you don't do anything for adults. And he said, well, I do. And then I was like, okay, well, I guess now I'm doing it too. And I think so martial art was really important to me to kind of find my inner balance, and it was like my body thing. So it teaches you discipline, it teaches you different moves, and it's not so much, for me, it's kind of it has some similarities with self-defense and empowerment self-defense, and like lots, but it's not the same thing. So that was kickboxing for me. And then I started hearing a lot about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and people saying, oh, like you either love it or you hate it. And so like here we go back to my godfather again. When I was in Belgrade this summer, he said, oh, my friend runs a club. Do you want to talk to him? And I talked to him, and he said, there is this great guy in Bristol who runs school, like Professor Giza, at Gracie Barra Jiu-Jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school in Bristol. You should go, like, talk to him. So I got in touch with this person. And I remember I was in the room in Croatia at that point, and he said, well, I need to tell you, this is like Mount Everest of martial arts. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I've started, what was it, like a month or so ago? And it's a gym in a part of town which is not one of the best parts of town. So, which means that I felt at home straight away, because I resonate with places like that, and I felt really welcome. I mean, I felt welcome in kickboxing as well, and like we have very good conversations there, and quite challenging.
Right.
It's more of a body thing again. So yes, I think I am a martial artist. It's just discipline and working on the body, not in the sense like, oh, I can be stronger this, but oh my god, look what my body can do now.
Absolutely. So you're discovering all these aspects of also using the research for empowerment self-defense, and you're bridging it with strengthening your skills and your power in the physical sense as well. So it's a good balance to have. It's important balance to have both, as the 5 principles of fight kick in after we're using the skills of what do we think about the situation, and when we have to use it, we have to use it.
Yeah, well, you did, and I wrote an article about it. It's about the best fight. It's on a political platform. I can send you the link. It's like, and it is about the best fight is the fight you didn't have, and that's all value of prevention. But knowing that knowing inside viscerally that you know how to defend yourself is really important, because that gives you that power, that gives you that empowerment to go, okay, if it comes to this, I know what to do, and I'm not going to freeze because I've been practicing this, and I know how to do this.
Wow, absolutely. So I wanted to talk to you and share with our listeners of the Change the Culture podcast. We mentioned that back in March you were at My Power for International Women's Day, and you shared your incredible story of knocking on your father's door at the age of 28, right?
28,
is that?
Yep.
And you never met him before?
Or after.
Or after. Okay, so maybe you can share with us this process, what it was like for you. And we could also link the story in the show notes as well, where they could actually hear the incredible how
Thank you.
Out.
It's actually a story about my supervisor. So it's and how she, because it was about the women who influenced us
in our lives, right?
Yeah. But I've used the finding of my father as an example, because I came to Bristol to find my father being raised on, as a good girl, you need somebody to save you. And obviously father is the one to save you, I never met him. And I came to Bristol, found a job because I didn't want him thinking that, I'm here to get his money, found a place to live and so on, went to his door, knocked, and his wife, he wouldn't even talk to me. His wife told me to F off and do something with my life. And that was hard. Yeah, it was quite soul crushing, because I was like, I pinned all of those hopes on like someone's going to come and save me. As stories told me that's what happens to the girls. So it was hard few weeks, months, but then I did something out of it. And I did a PhD on like narrative inquiry into stories of people who went to search for missing parents, because I kept meeting people who had similar experiences. And I was like, okay, why didn't I find out about it? I'm a big reader, I'm a big geek. I tried to find the literature, but it seemed like one type of story was privileged, which is, oh yes, we met, everything was fine. But my big learning was like, when people want to find you, they do. And when people leave, they leave for a reason. If they want to come back again, they do. So yes, it was a bit of a reality like a reality show. It was like reality shock, I guess. But then that led me into the PhD, and changing the stories about that, because it's like there was a lot of it. So I still don't know him, and I chose not to meet him. And now, paradoxically, like, he lives about 5 miles that way. So he lives very close to where I live. And I know that, but I'm like, okay, you don't get to meet me, and this is my choice now. So yeah.
It's really coming to terms with a hard reality, but making the best of it, and running after our loved ones, or not loved ones, running after people that aren't interested, are not the ones that we need maybe they're not the ones that we need in our lives. And
Even if they made you.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up with my grandparents, and I don't really share much about on the Change the Culture podcast about my own personal journey, but it's, I think, the fact that you had your godfather and I had my grandmother, and then you're the person who helped you through this story. When you got to start your PhD, you can share about your mentor. And
oh, Jane Speedy is an amazing woman who I'll never. So I lived with a professor, Kelly Johnson, who worked at university. I was doing the cleaning and cooking, and like that was my job, but I didn't have to pay for rent. So like we had like this lovely living together. And she's the one who said, why don't you do a PhD out of it? And I was like, you can do a PhD out of it? Okay, no problem. So I wrote a proposal. I went for an interview, and I got accepted. I was like, what? Like, University of Bristol, which is like one of the top 10 universities in the UK, just like went, yes, okay. And I was like, well, what do I do now? So like, okay, no problem. I shall call this woman who's my supervisor. So I gave her a call. She was like, come and meet me. And I came, and I remember her turning around in her office, and she was like, oh, it's okay. You know how to write. We will be fine, because I don't like people who write boring. And that's, Jane is just, she was challenging me in the best possible ways to literally go, like, her sense, like, go get lost and write your way back. So I would be immersing myself in not just literature, but like stories of people I've interviewed who also had their own stories and dealing with it. And yes, it was a very like deep process, challenging process, but also very inspirational process, which at the end resulted not just in me having a PhD, but like having some new stories to kind of having my power back. I think that was the important thing. So instead of leaving part of the story for my father to write, I decided to write his bits too, and go like, okay, this is what I have to say about this, and this is mine. And too bad you missed on me. I'm quite awesome. So yeah.
Right. And you're using Tao. And does it help you heal? Do you feel like that just the healing, it's a healing journey?
Yeah, I used it before I even know how it was called, but that's where ESD is brilliant, because it gives you that structure and kind of gives you like almost hangers. It is like, it is a toolbox, isn't it? So, and you can add your own tools in your toolbox. And, this was mine.
So tell us about Nesreća, the accident.
The accident. Yeah. It was, so during the lockdown, during pandemic, I made friends with the creation writer, Christina Gavrin, and we decided to write together. And that was amazing, because I always wanted to do something with my writing, but I was too shy. I was like, oh, it's not good enough. And she's the one who said, like, let's go apply like to competitions. And this was a competition of like a story about something which happens in traffic, like in 505 words. I was like, okay, I can do that. So it's a story about the woman who recognizes an opportunity to leave abusive relationship because there's a guy who kind of controls her, and he knows where she is. He tracks her all the time, but she sees this as like, okay, so I'm here now. She always has her passport with her. She's just trying to find a good opportunity. And then, she, like, I'll tell you what it is about. It's in Serbian. So it's like, and there is a woman in a car next to her, and they have like the same, this might get a bit, what's the word? Too intense. So like, content warning, they have a very similar trail of like cigarette
burns,
extinguished the cigarette burns on their hands. And this woman in the other car says like, yes, sometimes I made food too salty or not salty enough or this. And it's like, just so you know, you're not alone. So the woman in the car just goes to another car. And that's, I thought there's no way that something like that would win because, it's not happy-go-lucky. However, they recognized it as valuable, and then they offered me to publish my novel after that. And yeah, that's.
And this is the novel that you're writing now, the one we do talk about blocks?
Yes. So, I mean, I've been writing that since 2007, to be honest, but it started off as a collection of stories, but then I realized and the editor realized that they're all interconnected. So now it's a story. So it's a story about what happens in one building of 6 floors on each floor when somebody who's very important, one of the neighbor dies, one of the neighbors one neighbor dies. And then what happens, because they all have stories about him and, what happens then.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. Is it gonna hopefully it'll be it's in English?
No, it's in Serbian, because there are like the books about blocks are very few, and those few I know of, there might be some others, are about violence gangs. Look how cool we are because violence gangs, horrible place to live in, and this is more of a, it's like human neighbor story. It's, there's some fantastic people living there.
Wow. I'm sure they each just uncover stories that others don't know and about this person.
Yeah, because I had to fight for like book, like as I said, like the book promotion needs to be in the blocks. I don't want to do it in town. It's like, there are 2 places where I might do it, and I might do it in a cafe because I know that the people, same as I did. So like I used to feel very uncomfortable going to museums and theaters, and it was like, what am I doing here? It's like I kind of feel like, what's this place? How do you behave? But if we go to a local cafe, we know how to behave there. So, and one of the kids who used to come in my godfather's cafe now runs his own. So I think that would be my perfect place, but I need to talk to the child. I call him child. He's all but a child. He's like 2 meters by 2 meters, massive man now with his own family. But in my head, he's, child. So
knowing him, wow. And it's a full circle. It's a full circle. And that's amazing. You taking your story and churning it and creating something from it, and for others to consume and to experience. Those that live it, and others that have no understanding. It's like a bridge of. It's so exciting. I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. If I read about Brooklyn.
Oh my God, they have a song. I need to send you that. It's called Block Brooklyn.
Really?
So it goes, this is going to say it's Block Brooklyn, Block Brooklyn, Block Brooklyn, Pato. Kako brate Brooklyn, brate, Block je brate zakon. So it's like, Block is like a Brooklyn, but Block is better, basically. It's like local patriotism.
So you're saying that Brooklyn has is known in the blocks to be tough,
but not for its culture, my friend. Unfortunately,
right.
I'll send you the song.
Like Brooklyn. I was called Annie Tough Like Brooklyn back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. There's a little edge to being from Brooklyn. It's kind of like, yeah, I can manage that. I'm not afraid. I can do that. That walking out of Brooklyn is a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. But we have a few more minutes together. I'm so grateful, Dr. Jelena Nolan-Roll, the Change of Culture podcast. Share with us, now that you're in Bristol, you growing up in a place that was less safe, and now you're in a place that's safer. You're living a safe and happy life. So how does that, especially for your family, your daughter, how does that express itself to you?
Well, how it looks like is that, yes, like I do live now in a quite a good part of Bristol, and like my daughter goes to a really good school. She's 5. And it's like part of it's quite boring for me because I'm like, I know what to do in crisis. What is this? Big, but maybe that's why I go and train, and like where I go and train. And I feel grateful. I feel grateful quite a lot. And I'm very much aware of my privilege at this point of time, which is precisely why I do what I do and want to, empower people, not help people, but empower people to do that on their own, whatever that means for them. It's, yes, same as I was empowered by others who really believed in me, even when they didn't believe in themselves. So it's like, the guys in the cafe, when I did my last exam in psychology, they made me a massive party. And when I was like, oh my God, I want to go to England, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I came to England with 200 pounds. That's all I had. And they were like, no, you'll be fine. You'll manage. Like, look what you did. And I was like, yes, it was £2 Ryanair flight from Budapest. So it's just, I did some crazy things. I wouldn't do it now, but because I have a 5-year-old mostly.
Right.
So yes, and it's the importance of that community. And I'm like, I also feel really privileged to be part of that community, like my power community, ESD community, all the people who are working towards empowering others to, build better world. And better world is the world without violence, or without, this stupid violence. Because if you want to call martial arts violence, then, which is not, it's like, yes. So yes, I think once you are in a position of privilege, you need to, you said it's like, you need to like do that circle thing. Like it's it's your obligation to give back, but not, I mean, obviously, I can donate money, but I think I'd rather donate my time to empower people to do whatever it is they want to do.
To afford them the choices to be able to move away, move towards safer life. You took your courage with you to move towards a safer life. You took a chance, and you built something, and you're always connected to the world that you came from, with respect, in the fact that now you're somewhere else, and you can look back at that community and say,
it's still my community. It's like, I go back to the block and I walk around like Sava River, and like I like doing that, because like blocks are much better now as well, because like, so there's a new bus station being built, so like prices are going up, and it's becoming much better. But like, 90s were worse. Like this is much better, but it is still my community, and that's still where I come from. So there's really no point in saying like, no, I'm from here or there. I'm not. Like, I am from the blocks, and I'm proud of it.
Wow, incredible. Thank you so much. Maybe there's some last message you want to share with our listeners before we end off the show, and how people could reach you and reach out and send you.
Well, my email is drnolan-roll@gmail.com. So yes, write me stuff. Like if you resonate with something, write that too. I like writing and like conversing with people. If you do have a chance, do ESD, not because we all work in that universe, but because it's really something which can help people become better selves and prevent violence. So it's like it frees, like I feel it like something which freed me to be me. And that made me become better mother, better friend, better partner, better everything. It's quite cool.
Amazing. You tapped into ESD, and it gave you the power to approach life to reframe things, and approach life in in a certain way, and to take the challenges head on.
Yes. And think
to
about them. That's it. So it's like now when I need to make an important decision, I do go like through like, okay, or when I feel about there's something I don't like, I can step back and go like, okay, so what's going on here? Like, what is it I want to do? I know I have choices, and like, there's think, heal, run, fight, tell choice. And when because it's quite simple and effective. I don't need to think, oh, do I want to do this? Or like, okay, so which principle I'm going to go under? And it really helps to live fulfilled life. So yes.
Well, thank you. You're such an inspiration to me. I am going to, without promising, but I will do my best to set aside time for me to write my story and to encourage my story. Hopefully I'll send something to you to read, and that would be wonderful for me. And I just want to thank you again, Dr. Jelena Nolan-Roll, for being on the show. We would love to hear from our listeners of the Change the Culture podcast. So pop over to the Change the Culture Facebook group and share your thoughts, questions, and success stories with us. You can catch up on our last podcast where we had on the show ESD and Impact Personal Safety Instructor Sarah MacArthur. She's also the CEO of Power of XYZ, which is a boutique creative agency dedicated to the elements of storytelling, advocating for violence prevention. We want you to be part of the conversation and be part of the solution. So stay tuned for the next Change the Culture podcast, where we will hear from more professionals in the field of ESD around the world. And thank you again.